Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and anyone anywhere above or in between. My name is Virginia, and welcome to my channel. I hope you guys are having an excellent start to your new year. Yay, 2020. So far, I have been able to deep clean my house and knock a filling out of my tooth. So that's a thing. It's fine though. I'm not like in any pain, but I definitely need to make a dentist appointment ASAP before my bones get infected and I die. Rational thinking. I'm really good at that. It's actually super snowy where I am as I'm recording this, and my dog is having the best time running in and out of the back door, tracking snow into our newly cleaned kitchen. But she's the real master of the house here, so I just let it happen. Anyway, if you hear her in the background, it's because she's super pumped about life. Right, Lulu? Oh, she's gone. She's too busy being pumped to sit in one room. My cat, however, is less than excited. But he's not really excited about much anymore because he's an old man. He's a crotchety dandy of an old man. His name's Oscar, named after Oscar Wilde, and he is a huge mama's boy. Which is entirely my fault, and I'm honestly not really sorry. I like being the sole recipient of his love and affection. It makes me feel powerful. So, my life aside, let's talk about building. For today's build, we are doing an actual residential lot. I know, crazy, right? I've taken my historic Japanese builds from community lots to an actual livable, playable house. This lot is in Willow Creek, right next to the pancakes, actually. And it runs you about 60,000 simoleons, something like that, give or take. This house is actually based entirely on a single picture that I saw while researching for all of these builds. I will put the painting up on screen so you can see what I'm working with. It is based on a traditional Japanese print that is about the Yoshiwara, or the floating world. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. The floating world. Quick warning. From this point onward, I may start talking about things that may or may not have to do with sexy time. I'm gonna keep it PG, but the subject matter of this is what it is. Prostitutes and cross-dressing are incoming, so you have been fully warned. Turn away now if that's not something you want to hear about. So the Yoshiwara was a very famous yukaku, or red light district, in Edo. The Yoshiwara was situated along the Nihonbashi, which was near the Tokaido entrance to Edo City. Well, the original Yoshiwara was actually burned down in 1657 during the Great Fire of Meideki. After that, the Yoshiwara moved, and it was then known as Shin Yoshiwara, or the new Yoshiwara. But you know what? That doesn't really matter, because you don't actually need to know your way around, a feudal Japanese city, now do you? Moving on. I know what some people might think about this, like, really? That's what you're going with? You're gonna do a red light district house? And my answer is absolutely, 100%. Like, you can't really talk about Edo and not talk about the Yoshiwara, and Edo definitely had its fair share of prostitutes. Both male and female, by the way. And the Yoshiwara was just super well known throughout Edo, Japan. That being said, prostitutes were a thing, but there were other people that called this infamous district home, such as writers and painters, actors, geisha, all types of creative people. But before I get into the wonderful aspects of Yoshiwara, it can't be overlooked that this was a place where many girls led less than joyful lives. Many girls were sold or bartered or loaned to establishments in the Yoshiwara to make money for their families. It was straight up human trafficking. There's no way around it. The best these girls could hope for was to study under one of the higher ranking courtesans, but that was about as common as you or I starring in like a Hollywood blockbuster film. So for most girls and boys that called Yoshiwara home, life was not sunshine and daisies. And it would be ignorant and really like callous of me not to mention those girls and the struggles that they went through during that time. So, I definitely have a fascination with the Yoshiwara as an artistic hub, but I also know what really lay beneath the surface. So I know that's kind of dark, but it's true. And history should never be painted over to make it easier to stomach. That's not the way that learning about history should work. But let's talk about something less soul-crushing. In this build, there are a few things I changed from the painting, and a few things that weren't shown in the painting that I needed to add. Obviously, the painting is just, a front image of the house. So the back of the house is kind of left up to interpretation. A couple of major things worth noting is that most urban houses in Edo didn't have, their own full bathrooms. They might have, an outhouse toilet situation, but most people went to public baths for actual showers. Most houses didn't have full kitchens. You might have a small hearth, but people mostly ate out for almost every meal. There were food vendors everywhere in Edo. There were, people walking around with, little trays selling you, dried fish. So you, didn't really have to cook that often, especially in a house like this. But not having a shower or a kitchen doesn't really make sense for The Sims, so I just chucked those out back. I did try and make them historically accurate, however. And like I said, this house, a yukaku house, wouldn't be a family-centric, floor plan. This kind of house was meant for entertaining clients. Yes, clients, that's what we're gonna call them. Which is very different from, say, the rural Japanese house that I built in a previous video. So if I can figure out how to link, one day, I will put one of those notifications that will link you to that video. So anyway, let's talk a little bit more about history, not soul-crushing history. When you think of the Yoshiwara, the best kind of parallel you can draw is Paris, France, during the Moulin Rouge era, that Bohemian Revolution portion of the city. Well, Japan's culture evolved almost entirely separate from, Western civilization, thanks to Sakoku, or the closed country policy of Japan during this time. But it's pretty interesting that their red light district mirrored the red light districts of, a lot of Western cities that we know of. Artists and prostitutes always just hung out. And I'm sure there is a deep sociological or psychological reason for that. I'm sure of it. The artists that I mentioned before, the kabuki actors, the geisha, and whatnot, were said to be involved in mizu shobai, or the water trade. The floating world, the water trade, you kind of see a theme here. It's all very water-centric. Kind of like Edo itself. Edo was kind of set up like Venice. There were canals everywhere, so water was a big way to get around. And the Yoshiwara was a breeding ground for creativity, and it had a way more lax way of life than most people endured in Edo, Japan. The strict class codes were often overlooked in the Yoshiwara, so a commoner could be treated the exact same as, say, a samurai. As long as you had the money, then you were worth the time. And there were a lot of different groups of people, like I said, that called the Yoshiwara home, and I'm just going to talk about a couple of them because I don't have 8 hours to sit here and talk your ear off about the Yoshiwara. One interesting group that really stood out to me, and I just thought it was worth mentioning, was a group of fellas called the Taikomochi, or Hokkan, sometimes referred to as male geisha. They were basically the equivalent to court jesters at one point, but they kind of evolved into all-around artists as, time went on. They were the original geisha, basically. They were dancers, performed tea ceremonies, played music, all of that type of stuff that we associate with geisha, only they were men. They weren't women. But as time moved on, and the mid-18th century, Onna geisha, or female geisha, came onto the scene, and the taikomochi, or the male geisha, began to pretty much decrease in popularity. Some of them began calling themselves otoko geisha, or male geisha is the direct translation of that, just so they could kind of get some of that action that the female geisha were getting, but it didn't really work out, and their numbers just kept dwindling, and eventually they ended up being basically background supporting roles for the famous female geisha. So I thought that was a really interesting kind of dynamic. We always associate geisha with women because that's the traditional view that we see of them. But it actually started out pretty male-centric. And speaking of geisha, we all pretty much know what a geisha was. An artist with their signature face paint and their beautiful kimono and playing a koto and dancing. But it's definitely worth noting, I know people say it all the time, but you can't talk about them and not say this. Geisha were not prostitutes. People still sometimes confuse geisha with women that were called oiran, or courtesans. They were completely different things. Both geisha and oiran were skilled in things like chado, the art of tea ceremony, ikebana, flower arranging, the koto, the shamisen, dance, calligraphy, all that kind of good stuff, but geisha did not sell sex as part of their repertoire. Oiran, however, definitely did. So yeah, geisha, not prostitutes. And like Memoirs of a Geisha is basically like the story of a geisha mixed with the story of an oiran. They definitely did not overlap as much as the movie makes it out to be. So again, oiran were kind of like geisha, but they definitely had a little something extra on the side. And you can't talk about the floating world without talking about the prostitutes. You just can't. And as far as prostitutes went, there was an actual class system to the world's oldest profession. A person that simply sold themselves was called a yujo, which is just prostitute. Not that that's a bad thing. I'm not saying they're just a prostitute and therefore, not as important. Everybody is important regardless of what type of lifestyle they lead. But just to draw the distinction between the two, you have the yujo that are just prostitutes, and then you have the oiran. And oiran were a higher form. They were known for their intelligence, beauty, and artistic ability. And those are the ones that people often confuse with geisha. Becoming an oiran took skill and determination. It was basically learning most of the same things geisha learn, only on top of it you were a courtesan. The beautiful thing about oiran culture is that anyone could become an oiran with enough hard work. Well, and the luck of being reasonably attractive, of course. The most high-ranking positions in society were often totally unreachable for a commoner in feudal Japan. Like, you couldn't work your way up through the system. It was strict class roles across the board. If you were born a commoner, you stayed a commoner, and you died a commoner. Obviously, there are exceptions throughout history, but for the most part, that was just the lay of the land. Oiran, however, were an exception to that. A girl could work her way up. She could be born the daughter of a rice farmer. And no, her life would not have been sunshine and daisies, but she could work her way into a position that held some manner of respect within, feudal Japanese society. The highest ranking oiran was called a taiyu, and the taiyu were powerful. They were very powerful women. They were powerful enough to openly refuse clients. They basically called their own shots. And they could charge as much as a month's worth of salary for just one single evening with them. Taiyu were basically mini celebrities. And they influenced fashion and culture for a long time throughout Edo City. And to this day, there is a parade called, alright, let's see if I can say this, the Bunsui Sakura Matsuri Oiran Dochu. And that is a parade that still happens today, where women dress up as a taiyu, which, by the way, the taiyu had way more elaborate kimono than geisha did, so sometimes you'll see oiran and think it's a geisha, but geishas, while still being beautiful and having, absolutely stunning kimono, they weren't as elaborate as an oiran's. But anyway, a modern Japanese woman will put on these traditional oiran kimono, and they will walk through the district. It's like a full-on parade. And the reason they would do this, traditionally, way back in the day, was to show, the Yoshiwara, how beautiful and powerful and yet welcoming they were. And when you see those super high platform shoes, you know, sometimes that you'll see in traditional Japanese garb, the black ones that are like huge, they were a signature of the Oiran parade, and thus the parade was pretty slow moving because it's not easy to walk in those shoes. And Kabuki was another huge player in the Yoshiwara, but Kabuki is a huge topic that I cannot cover in this like 23-minute video. But what I will say is that Kabuki actors, all of whom were male during most of the Edo period, female Kabuki was actually banned because it was too erotic, and a lot of actresses, you know, also sold themselves. But then after they banned women, they started using like younger boys in female roles, and that also was troublesome. On that same note, which is gross, I know, not, you know, not the gay stuff, but like the young part. But I mean, let's be real, history was pretty gross overall. Like, there's questionable morality in every single culture throughout the ages. You cannot look at history through the lens of modern morals. You know, if you do, then you're gonna hate everybody that ever existed. Just remember that. Not saying that it was okay. Definitely wasn't. You know, no question there. But again, you know, this happened everywhere. This was not something that just happened in Japan, and we should, you know, freak out and call them all pedophiles. Like, think about ancient, like, Greece and Rome for a second. Anyway, eventually Kabuki consisted of only adult men. That was the way that they tried to fix that situation. Although, male performers would often still be very sought after, you know, for when they played the female roles. Which Kabuki actors were hired for specific role types. So, like, if you were a Kabuki actor, you would play the hero, and you'd pretty much play the hero in every single play you were in. Or you would be the villain, or the woman. You gotta love that, you know, classic, she's the woman, and that's her character archetype. Gotta love that trope, right? She doesn't need to be the hero and a woman. If she's a woman, she's just the woman. Ugh. Kabuki actors lived in the Yoshiwara, and there were 3 major Kabuki theaters within that area. They burned down all the time, though, and got rebuilt, and then they moved eventually because the shogun was like, this is against fire code, you guys keep burning down. But Kabuki actors often lived in the theaters themselves, or in the houses, like, directly around the theater, because you basically spent your whole life there. But again, Kabuki is a huge, huge subject, and I highly suggest you can watch documentaries on it, you can read about it. There aren't a lot of recordings of Kabuki, because you're not allowed to record Kabuki. You have to see it in person, because that's, you know, that's the way it was meant to be seen. So, whew, man, there's so much to cover with the Yoshiwara, and as you can tell, like, I get very excited about it. I think it's a very cool, kind of section of Japanese society. Again, it has the dark underbelly that all places have a tendency to have, but there was a lot of beauty that came from it too. And I don't have the time to go into all of it, so I'm just having a deep existential crisis like I normally do. I highly suggest you look up the floating world. There are books about it, there are movies about it, all kinds of stuff. And if you're watching Memoirs of a Geisha, just keep in mind that that wasn't necessarily true. So, let's look at the build now that, you know, once again, I have rambled. So one of the things that I really wanted to do to incorporate the kind of thematic quality of the floating world is all of these candles and putting all of the like curtains everywhere. It was pretty traditional. Women were often spoken to by men through curtains before like proper introduction or before marriage or before something like that. And I know that there are a lot of paintings out there of the Yoshiwara where the women are behind curtains still, where you can kind of see them. They're kind of like a sheer curtain situation, but you don't like just see them face to face. And it was almost like window shopping. I know this is terrible, you know, again, by modern moral standards, but that's kind of the idea. You kind of walked through and you could kind of see the women, but not 100%. Or men. Like I said, there were also men who did the work of a Oiran. I don't know if there were any men that actually made it that high, like in rank, though. but I know that they definitely partook in the sex trade, and they always have. You know, it definitely is always more women, but, you know, don't let anyone ever tell you that men don't, you know, prostitute themselves. I have no idea where this conversation has gone. How did this video get to this point? Who knows? But anyway, so we are actually coming up towards the end of the video now that I've, I don't know, awkwardly said a lot of things about the sex trade. On my next video, I am going to be putting out on Wednesday, so a week from today, just because it's a really big build, and it's very different than the last couple that I've put out. It's definitely still Japanese inspired, but it's not historic necessarily, at least unless you count fantasy as history. Which, I mean, you know, maybe Lord of the Rings is history. It's not Lord of the Rings, but it's definitely still Japanese inspired, and it was created by Japanese people, but it's very, very different, and I'm really excited about it. It kind of came to me while playing another video game, and I was like, you know what, I want to recreate this. So yeah, I hope you'll stop in and check it out, because it's going to be really fun, and I'm really excited about it. I got to do a lot of, like, roof manipulation, and terrain manipulation, and all kinds of weird manipulation. That sounds really bad. I was just manipulating people. But yeah, it's really cool. So I hope you'll stop in and check it out. It's going to be on Wednesday, because I have to spend a long time editing it, because I have, like, 6 hours worth of recording footage that I have to edit through. Yeah, that's how big this build is. But it's, you know what, it's actually not that big. It's not huge. It is in Windenburg, but it's not the biggest build I've ever done. Anyway, thank you for stopping by. I hope that you enjoyed today's build. It is downloadable, of course. ItsLoolyLoo is my ID, so you can download it on the gallery. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more historic builds, whether they be Japanese or wherever else we go from here. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Stay warm if you're in a winter climate, and stay cool if you're in a hot climate. Thoughts and prayers. Ew, gross. Why did I say that? Anyway, thanks for stopping by. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.